Welcome to the Post Shift Podcast, your raw look at the hospitality industry, brought to you by SHC. What has happened, Post Shifters? Welcome back to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Sean Soole. I've been live streaming a lot lately, and if you have been noticing on Facebook and everywhere else that I do it all, it's been a lot. But I've been trying to get me as many episodes as I can all the way up into Christmas so that you guys have stuff to listen to. I'm looking forward to the chat today because the gentleman is one of the most revered whiskey experts, well, spirit experts in the world, but whiskey's definitely someone we're going to be chatting about today. And I'd love to introduce Mr. Dave Broom. How are you, sir?
I'm very well indeed. It's very good to see you.
Very good to see you as well. So you just, as we were just talking back in the green room, you just got back from Barbados. You've got like a 3-day gap, right? You've got come back from Barbados, and then you're going to go to Scotland tomorrow.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I feel like extreme change in temperature, but yeah, I'm kind of getting my head out of rum and back into whiskey. But yeah, the Barbados trip was absolutely extraordinary. And yeah, I would recommend anybody interested in rum to look up the Barbados Rum Experience. They run it once every year, and it's a mix of distillery visits and some real hardcore academic lectures on, it doesn't matter whether it's growing cane or production or a deep dive into history, it's all there. Yeah, so my mind was blown.
Because you're obviously known for whiskey, but you've written books about rum. It's not obviously your first time in Barbados, right?
No, it was the first time for quite a while, actually. I'd been out to the Caribbean, but hadn't been to Barbados for a wee bit, so it was good to catch up with the guys and see what's going on. A lot is going on, Mangay doing the single estate, St. Nicholas Abbey, laying down more and more stock. That's great, and Foursquare just generally being amazing. So
we've done a couple of rum seminars here in Victoria with like Plantaray and a few other distilleries. Worthy Park was another one we did, and it is interesting because I think majority of people have, like, when you talk about whiskey, people have tasted good whiskey because there's so many rules and regulations around it. But then rum, I don't think people really have experienced rum. And when you give them an opportunity to taste rum in its natural form, no sugars added and all that sort of stuff, I think it takes people back a little bit. And then you have to sort of almost re-educate your palate and re-educate people what rum actually is.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting. And I find it fascinating to see. And I think some of the stats are kind of backing this up, that as whiskey continues to kind of, I would say especially Scotch, continues to kind of rise in price, people who are already into this idea of the flavors of oak-aged spirits are beginning to get towards rum because you're getting extremely high quality for less, a lower price. So yeah, I think you're beginning to see this interesting kind of crossover between. It might not even be a crossover. I don't think people are necessarily giving up whiskey, but actually maybe perhaps adding rum into their portfolio. And I think that's an incredibly positive thing. All great spirits should be tried.
100%. So how'd you get your start in the spirits world, in the spirits world, writing about it? Because writing about spirits is fun from the outside, but it's a ton of work, and it's, especially in this day and age, it's a ton of work and hard to make a living out of it. How did you get started in the spirit writing game?
In the spirit writing game, right? Okay, so I left university. I worked for a UK wine merchant called Oddbins in the shops. Did WSET exams, and then when I left, I was beginning to write about music, actually. I always wanted to write, so I was beginning to write about music. And then I got a job as features editor on a Drinks Trade Weekly. And I was there for 7 years. And, in that, I joined 1988. I was there for 7 years. And it was just as kind of single malt was beginning to grow, it was just as rum was actually beginning to kind of go, oh, there's this thing called premium rum, Eldorado 15-year-old coming out, etc. Appleton Estate, being launched in the UK and all of that. Bars opening, there was no cocktail culture in Britain, apart from a few top end hotels who wouldn't let me through the door, So there was this kind of bubbling up of interest in terms of quality spirits. So when I left to go freelance in '95, I thought I was just going to write about all drink, but it became fairly obvious quite quickly that not only was I really interested in spirits, but there was more opportunity, to make a living writing about spirits than there was making a living writing about wine, because there were about 3 million people writing about wine in the UK, and were very good. And there were 3 people writing about spirits. So it was kind of a no-brainer, but at the same time, I think there was greater latitude in the part of editors at that point, because there was nobody writing about it, and because there was no interest. You were essentially allowed to write what you want. You could come up with the craziest ideas. Like one piece I did for radio and for I think it was Daily Telegraph as well, was, there's all this talk about smuggling whiskey, the smuggling era in the late 18th century. And I thought, well, I wonder what it was like. So we just got some ponies and strapped some whiskey, and we anchored, we barrels to the side, and hiked for 2 days from Glenlivet down to Balmoral. Like, you wouldn't do that with wine. You just wouldn't do that with wine. But it was kind of, oh yeah, that's all right. These spirits guys are kind of weird. So I always say I was in the right place at exactly the right time. I had Michael Jackson as my, not only a friend but as my mentor. Charlie McLean, who remains a really, really great friend. And then access to just the guys who are making the whiskey. So the distillers, the master blenders, etc. I could just sit and ask them why and learn from them. It is a hell of a lot harder, I think, these days to do what I've always done, which is essentially long form, either journalism in magazines or whatever, or writing books, as well as kind of talking and training side. It's a lot tougher. The media has changed. So yeah, I'm glad that people are continuing to write about spirits, but personally speaking, I know that there's less work out there in terms of that kind of old school way of doing it.
Back in the day, were the distillers and master blenders like, why are you talking to me, man? Like, no one wants to talk to me. No one's ever come up to me and said, hey, let's sit down and have a chat about how you do things.
Yeah, there was a certain element of that, and some of them. It was an interesting period, that the kind of late 80s, early 90s, because in wine, talking in terms of the UK, what happened with wine was that wine became democratized, and one way that wine became democratized was that the Australians came in. And the Aussies came in, and the winemakers were there. So it wasn't marketeers and it wasn't UK importers or salespeople talking about the wine. The guys from Australia came in and went, "We love what we make, boom, and do that." And whiskey began to learn from that. Whiskey realised that the people who were getting interested in single malt, in particular, which was reviving the Scotch industry after a long period of decline, wanted to know facts and figures and understand production and understand flavor. And with the best will in the world, the people in the marketing department didn't know that, but the people who made it did. So all of a sudden you see that initial wave of brand ambassadors actually being the distillers themselves. So it was a really intriguing shift in terms of how whiskey was being communicated to, not just to the UK, but to the world, because the people who made it were suddenly up there speaking about it. And that was great. That was fascinating, because all of a sudden there might have been a little bit of reluctance to begin with in some firms, but by and large it was, oh my God, I'm delighted to be able to tell you about this.
So you've got the new book coming out. Well, the updated 3rd edition of the World Atlas
Yeah.
of Whisky that comes out in like 2 weeks. 2 weeks, 26th of
Yes,
November.
yeah. It's out in the UK. Sorry, I'm just. Is my picture frozen? It's frozen where I am.
No, it's
but
not for you're
no.
good on my end.
You can see me waving. That's fine. It's okay. Yeah. So it's out in the UK. It's out in North America on 26th. Pre-orders can be taken. So yeah. Very exciting.
So what inspired you to do? Obviously, it's one of those things that obviously it's a 3rd edition, so you're always sort of going, okay, well, I've just gone to this market, and oh my God, the distilling culture in Colorado is incredible. Like, I need to do this. But is there a certain point where you're like, I need to do it, but I really don't want to do it because I feel like it's going to need an update as soon as I release the update?
I mean, the nature of the Atlas is it's out of date. As soon as it's published. My dear friend Ingvar Ronda, who does the amazing malt whiskey yearbook, new edition of that's just come out. I mean, Ingvar and I get talking all the time, and his is pretty comprehensive in terms of all the distilleries that are out there. But he knows that it's out of date. Immediately. The thing about this new edition is that it's not an update; it's a complete rewrite, because the last one was published in 2014. So you've got a decade of change in the whiskey industry, and it's a decade where it has changed the fastest, I think, in its history. There are more distilleries, there are more countries making whiskey, and it was pretty obvious, even in the initial chats about how to do this, that it would be pointless just trying to update it. Essentially, it was just rip it up and start again. And that meant taking out. It meant essentially a redesign of the book. So then trying to who were the most fascinating distillers who were moving whiskey forward. There are so many distilleries that it's impossible to put every single distillery in there. Or you could do it, but it would be a directory. The book is a book about flavor. The book is about, I like to think of it as pretentiously as an atlas of mindsets. Of the way that people are around the world are engaging with whiskey. And saying, right, what is my? A new distiller saying, what is my whiskey? How am I approaching it? So it's a map of where distilleries are. It's a map of flavors, but it's also a map of how people are thinking about whiskey. And that was really exciting. It was a huge task. I'm still recovering from it, but I'm really, really delighted that I did it. I learned a huge amount.
How are you seeing the modern day trends sort of altering the way whiskey is being crafted, in the way of how distillers are looking at market changes and demographic changes and Gen Z changing drinking culture all over the world? How is that affecting the whiskey production?
There's kind of two parts to.
Oh, I lost you. Okay, give me 2 seconds. Not sure what happened. Please stand by, everybody who is watching. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
There we go. We lost you for 2 seconds.
Boom. It disappeared. It gave me a chance to think. In terms of production, I think what the most interesting thing is, you're looking at whiskies getting made all around the world. Essentially, any country where distillation is legal is making whiskey. And when you speak to the distillers, the new distillers there, and you say, right, what are you making? And I'll deal specifically with single malt. They say, we're not making Scotch. It's the immediate response is, we're not making Scotch. What are you making? We're making whiskey that speaks of where we are. To paraphrase. So they're looking at their location. They're looking at what grows around them. Some malt can be anything. Not just necessarily barley. It can be smoked using different techniques. It can draw from food culture. It's being aware of what the climate is going to be doing in terms of maturation. So all of these things are really driving this new idea, I would say, of 21st century whiskey. And it's really drilling down into location. And it's in many cases, it's drilling down into community as well, and actually seeing the role that a distillery can play within a community. You're seeing that, I think, to great effect in the west coast of Scotland. I just got a sample of the first whiskey made in Tiree for 200 years. That just arrived yesterday, and that is there because this gives jobs to a remote community. And you see that happening all the way around the world when you're speaking to distillers. You're also, one of the other trends is that the number of times that I heard this story, from distillers who'd never met each other, of them as farmers, as grain farmers, going into their local bottle shop and picking up a bottle and then having the realization that their grain went into this whiskey, but their name wasn't on the label. And it's kind of, well, why don't I just do it myself? So you're seeing all these smaller scale farm distilleries beginning to grow around the world. In terms of that kind of Generation Z drinker, one of whom's upstairs at the moment, my daughter, they're not drinking as much. It's pretty tough out there for all drink, I would say. It's tough out there for whiskey. There's a whole number of different factors. People are watching the money in their pockets. You have this trend of less being consumed for health reasons, and that's all very sensible. More responsible drinking, good thing. You're also seeing the post-COVID market as well. Of people drank a lot during COVID. Sales went like that. So there's also this, how much of the decline that we're seeing across spirits is down to just everybody just returning to what it was like pre-COVID, and also retailers then, because so much was being consumed during COVID, overstocked. So there's actually a huge amount of whiskey or rum or gin or vodka or whatever sitting in warehouses at the moment in the anticipation that people would continue to drink as much as they were during the plague. So there's this element of destocking going on as well, which is, I think, blurring some of the figures. But yeah, tough. But it is tough at the moment. But the thing is that, a spirit like whiskey is resilient, and a spirit like whiskey will always go through these cycles. And I think we're actually in the middle of a cycle at the moment. It's like suddenly people are aware that sales are going down, but I think it's been building for a few years, to be perfectly honest. But whiskey is resilient. Rum is resilient. All these spirits are long-term. Long-term thinking is the way to get through this, and we will get through it. But yeah. Again, sorry. Long.
No, that's amazing. It's more insightful. Like I'm in the on-premise trade, so like for me, I see the decline in alcohol sales, the increase in non-alcoholic beverages. Like, I'm seeing double-digit increases in non-alcoholic beverages. So it's an almost interesting conversation. It is an interesting sort of take on like sales blew up during COVID, but then this decline, is it declining from just the COVID, or was it declining from before that, 2019? Was there a moment when you?
There's so many factors. Actually, I was out for a drink, an alcoholic drink, last night with a couple of friends from Ireland who have a chain of non-alcoholic bars, and they were talking about functional drinks as being something that could well begin to develop. So you have a non-alcoholic spirit to which you could add extracts from cannabis or whatever when legal. And is that going to be a new trend and a new category that opens up within the next decade? That's going to be really interesting because people want to get their kicks some way. We are hardwired to be deranged in some way. It's kind of it's part of being human. So and it could be drinking too much coffee. There's a whole number of ways, but we need that as human beings to function. So are these functional drinks going to become a trend? That's worth thinking about.
Yeah. So was there a moment doing the third edition of the rewriting the Atlas? Was there a moment where you visited a distillery and was like, I've never seen that before. That is a fantastic technique. With your experience, do you still get surprised at things?
Oh God, yes. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the big ones, certainly one I was most excited to go and see was Leopold Brothers. To go and see Todd Leopold and his completely insane 3-chamber still, which to do quick précis of it. Todd being a phenomenal distiller and also historian. realized that we have this idea of what rye whiskey was like pre-prohibition, and people are now making rye and they're going, "Yeah, we're going back to the old ways of making it." And he dug away, and he realized that virtually all of the rye whiskey being made in America and also in Canada was made from this thing made in this still called a 3-chamber still. But the problem was nobody had one, and there was no documentation about how it was ever run. But he was intrigued by it. So he went to Vendôme, and there was one very kind of schematic drawing, I think, from a big distillery in Peoria. And they built one for him, and it took him ages to try and work out exactly how it functioned. But the whiskies that come out of it are astonishing because, as he says, it's an oil-making machine. And it's floral and it's rich, and it hasn't got that kind of slightly... It's got spiciness, but it's not got that kind of aggressive, growly spiciness, the acidity that you get from standard rye. That kind of blew my mind. That's incredible. I think sort of looking at some of the smoking techniques around the world are also fascinating. One for just to pick one as an example, in New Zealand, and this is a really good example of how whiskey is tapping into food culture. There is peat in New Zealand, and there are distillers using peat. Waiheke uses it to great effect, but peat has never been used to heat houses or to smoke food. What the Kiwis do is to use manuka wood, not honey. There's a great confusion with a Scottish distiller friend of mine who couldn't get his head around how they were smoking honey. And no, it's the wood, it's the tree. So Matt Thompson, for example, he's got a great distillery in Auckland, is using manuka smoked barley, and it gives this wonderful kind of eucalypt, oily, meaty kind of smoke. And there's a way of just attaching it to location. Del Back down in New Mexico, using mesquite. Fairy Lochen in Denmark using nettles, because nettles are used for cheese there. And the two kind of extreme ones. New distillery in Namibia using elephant dung for smoke, because that's the traditional fuel.
Yep.
And Iceland, Eva in Iceland, using sheep dung.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's there.
I've had a sheep dung smoked porter in Iceland, and a sheep dung smoked porter in Iceland. It's definitely one of those ones that takes you back, and then you're like, I shouldn't be enjoying this as much as I am, but I'm going to try.
Yeah, I've got to go back to it, really. She's got an older one. The younger one is pretty pungent. It's pretty sheepy. The older one, the matured one, has actually the wood is coming in, and it's just beginning to become more integrated. But yeah, I mean, so all of these things are just hugely exciting, and that, I think that's a great thing about whiskey, that is infinitely adaptable. That it's not just a template that everyone is following. Everyone has their own little technique, tweaking stills, finding new ways to distill, finding new crops to distill, different mixes. The way that the new wave of Irish distillers are going back to 18th century and 19th century mash bill recipes for pot still, where oats, for example, played a much more significant role. Rye was used, wheat was used as well. And the whiskies which are coming out of that, which are technically not allowed to be called pot still at the moment, but fingers crossed the law is going to change, are just compelling. And, that's one reason that Ireland is such an exciting country at the moment. So yeah, I mean, I could pick examples from every single country to be perfect.
Yeah, we have a distillery here in Vancouver, and it's Odd Society, and Gord, the distiller there, when he started doing peated whiskey. Yeah, when he started doing peated whiskies, He instead of peating the whole batch of grain, he would just peat one bag and then put that bag into their gin basket and let the vapor pass through the peated grain. And the amount of peat that comes off just that gin basket attachment is insane. Like, you wouldn't be able to guess that it's not 100% peated.
Yeah, I love that thinking. He sent me the mushroom one. You know,
the community,
I said, can I get some samples? Anyway, this box came through. He went, I didn't want to send anything normal, so I got this mushroom one. So, and mushrooms. It was great. I loved it. Yeah, so much good, great stuff happening in Canada, especially your part of the world. Yeah, really exciting. Yeah.
We're talking about like innovation with history and tradition, especially in the markets and the countries that have like deep roots, like Scotland and Ireland. Talking about oats and Ireland changing up the game. Do you think there's always tension about, especially like true loyal, like purists going, well, I only, like, you get the guys like, I only drink 18-year-old whiskey, I only drink non-chill filtered, I only drink no caramel added, da da da. Do you think there's a tension between like this innovation and tradition, or does everything have its place?
I think everything has its place, and I think one example, within Scotland, Scotch whiskey worshipped at the altar of efficiency for essentially since the 1970s. Wanting to make whiskey at lower cost, but actually getting more liters of alcohol out of every ton of barley. So efficiency. Barleys were bred to be able to deliver that. Various parts of the process were created to be able to produce more liters of alcohol. The result of that, and I would say especially from the barley side of things, and the lack of interesting yeasts being used, efficient yeast, but not yeast that give flavor, is that there's been a thinning of the flavor delivery in Scotch. Especially from a whole number of larger distilleries. Naming no names, but you taste them and they're just kind of thinner. Mm-hmm. They're good, but they're thin. But at the same time, you've got to bear in mind that Diageo, for example, have to make enough juice to make 20 million cases of Johnny Walker. So there is, and obviously, if you're in that area, you have to have an efficient production scheme. You have to have it. And they take immense care over distillery character, etc., etc. So if you're playing in that game, and it's valid, I think what has happened in whiskey, and again, speaking specifically about Scotch here, is that there is now another alternative to that pathway, because the new distilleries which are starting up, and a lot of older established distilleries, are kind of moving away from being wholly dependent on the fillings trade, making whiskey to the specification of the blender to go into whatever blend it was going into, and are making single malt. And because they're making single malt, they also then have to cut through 149 other single malts on the market. So therefore, they have to look at flavor, they have to look at quality, they have to look at production, they have to look at yeast, fermentation times, bam, 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 bam. All of a sudden, simply to make their business a valid one and a profitable one, they have to move into this area, which you could call innovation. So it's not dismissing. What I'm saying is there is a need for those big distilleries making a lot of whiskey in a very efficient way, because that is what's required for the bulk of Scotch whiskey, which is still being sold around the world. But there's also this really exciting new area where distillers are being able to play.
I get a lot of very old distilleries coming dropping stuff on my door and saying like, we've been selling all our stuff off to be blended for years and years and years, and now we're sort of stepping away from that, and we're sort of revitalizing a distillery that's been around for 200 years to do our own house single malt, and we're going to show the world what XYZ distilleries, and you never heard of them because they've only ever been sort of owned by Diageo and selling stuff to blenders.
Yeah. I mean, you look at just behind me here. I've got a wee sample from Tamdhu.
Mm.
Tandu, part of the Edrington Group, part Highland, part of the Edrington Group, really essentially unavailable as a single malt, always went into blends, always known as being a really good whiskey, bought by Ian MacLeod. And it's now, if you like sherry whiskey, if you're in that, I like Glenfarclas or Macallan or whatever, Tandu is coming in going, hello,
Yeah.
and they haven't really changed anything. They're just kind of going, hello, here I am. I think, what's happened with Glen Scotia, distillery that was, forgotten for years, all of a sudden Glen Scotia is a cult whiskey, quite rightly, because the quality is great, So you're seeing a lot of these kind of older Fettercairn, amazing whiskey. So you're seeing some of these older distilleries just kind of going, hello, you might not have heard of me, but and in some
You've tasted
in
me
some
somewhere.
cases, and it's the case that why did we never hear of Mortlach or it's because it made really good whiskey and the blenders loved it.
Yeah.
It wasn't because all these distilleries that were going into blends were making inferior quality whiskey. They were making really good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the region that you're looking forward to tasting more stuff in the country or the region that you're like, I need to taste more of this. I need to see where this is going. What's the one that's like a bit of a buzzword for you after writing the book?
Definitely the Nordics. If I can group it in our geographical region, I think what's happening in Nordics is hugely exciting. I'm not going to give you one answer. I think what's happening in Nordics is great, and the way it's allied to a kind of Nordic sensibility in terms of flavour and food culture and a love of engineering and all of that. There's a whole number of different elements at play within the Nordics. They don't all taste the same, but within. I would say I'm really excited what's happening in France. There's over 100 distilleries making whiskey in France now.
Wow.
Yeah, I know that came as a surprise. So it came as a surprise to me. I think one of the most intriguing developments within France is that you've got a lot of distillers in Cognac, and surrounding areas, beginning to distill, because Cognac stills lie silent for 6 months of the year, 7 months of the year.
Yeah.
Because you're only allowed to make cognac in a very specific window, and they've finally kind of gone, oh, hang on a minute, maybe we could do something else with these stills. And that approach to making whiskey, I think, is really fascinating, because it's coming from a cognac stroke wine background, and the stills are the cognac stills, and they just deliver a softness and a length and an elegance. So I think what's happening in France is really exciting. Australia, after I think that initial amazing burst of activity that you saw 20 years ago, which is mainly Tasmania. And for me, Australian whiskey just kind of plateaued a little bit. And now it's really taking off. And with much more variety. There's native grains beginning to be used. There's rye getting made. There's some really innovative malting going on as well. So Australia and New Zealand are, I think, really, really kicking. And the final two, American single malt, definitely.
Everybody's talking about it.
Yeah, and also what's happening in Ireland. Yeah.
No, it was interesting as a spirit geek. When I went to Cognac 2 years ago to get my certification, try and talk to the distillers about like the stills, and because there's so many distilleries making eau de vie for everybody, like there's so much like cross pollination. I was like really trying to knuckle down, because like when you do whiskey, it's like how tall is your stack, your swan neck, your line arm, like how is everything angled and what flavors you gain. And then I'm talking to the cognac distilleries, they're like, no, it's just the onion and then the swan neck and we're good to go. And I'm like, oh, okay. So nothing changed. And then you start going to distillery after distillery and you're like, oh, everything is very, very, very similar. Like reflux and everything is very similar, because everybody makes. I went to Verdon and Voyer, and they make cognac for Martel. Like It's just this crazy sort of cross pollination. So I'd be really interested in tasting some cognac with still whiskies.
Yeah, no, I think they're amazing, and you know, there's one great new distillery that the whiskey's not on the market yet, called Maison Linetti, which is in Sant'Emilio, and they're coming from a wine background, and they're doing things like lees aging and injecting with, you know, adding some lactobacillus, but you know, so kind of a wine element in terms of fermentation, and then using cognac stills, but then approaching the distillation in a very cognac-like way, you know, and depending on, you know, where the heads go back, you know, where did the heads go back, where did the tails go back? Did they go back to second distillation or first distillation? And really playing around with all of that, you know, all these little nuances that you can get. And I agree with you. You look at cognac and it's all kind of boom. You know, this is how we make it. And then there's all these kind of tiny little things. You know, are you on lees or off lees? Are you, you know, where's the heads going back? You know, etc. And it's really exciting. You know, and also, you know, coming, and I think in terms of maturation within cognac as well. And the cognac approach to whiskey, or even I would say the French approach to maturation of élevage, you know, of using dry cellars and wet cellars, of, you know, using that first initial blast of tannin and flavor from new wood, and then taking it out and putting it into a really old knackered cask and allowing it to mature and to oxidize. You know, that thinking, which is effectively new to whiskey. You know, it's not finishing. Finishing is not innovation. You know, I get really annoyed when people, you know, I get yet another you know, press release going, we've done something innovative because we've put it in a, you know, there's some sort of weird wine cask, you know. Finishing was innovative in the 1980s, 1990s, you know, come on, guys, you can do better. You know, and élevage, I think that approach to that active involvement in
it's super dynamic. It's crazy.
Blending within maturation, I think is, you know, that's a whole new area for whiskey, and that's really exciting.
So with you being in the game for as long as you have you seen the rise of whiskey tourism and these sort of like distilleries that are now showing up and actually going, okay, when we're building this distillery or upgrading our distillery, we need to have a visitor center. We need to have something that's interactive because people are actually coming to the distillery. I'm sure back in the day, and it's, even in BC here for the smaller guys, like you sort of go and it's a barrel in the middle of the distillery where you do a tasting, and it's not exactly not welcoming, but it's a little bit more grassroots raw. And now the money that's going into whiskey tourism is insane. Have you liked to see the change?
Yes, I'm delighted to see it. You know, I think some are a bit Disney-fied, you know, and there's a lot of kind of smoke and mirrors or bells and whistles or smoke, bells and whistles. You know, he's going, please, can you tell me about the whiskey? You know, there's, you know, one distillery in Scotland where you walk around and you think, nothing is being made here. This is just an art installation. You know, you know. So you know, I'm not naming names, but you can probably guess which one it is. But yeah, I think it's a very important element, and I think it's a very, very important element for a new distiller, new distillery as well, because you get people through the door and they will spend money, and I think kind of spinning back to that whole thing about community, about distilleries being in communities. You know, if you see what happens, again, I'm kind of talking about Scotch on the West Coast, is that when you have a distillery on an island such as Rasay or Harris or, you know, or Ardnamurchan on the mainland or whatever, you know, so you're employing people, so you're employing a lot of people, and then, well, it's intriguing. So you're going to have a visitor centre, and that means you're also then employing more local people. And because people are then coming to the distillery, it then ripples out, because what are you going to put in the shop? Well, you could probably use some local crafts. So boom, you know, all of a sudden it begins to ripple out around the community. So I think there's a whole number of different things with regard to whiskey tourism, and I think it's vitally important. It is now part and parcel of being a distiller. You know, you have that you know, consumer facing element, and I think that's good. You know, because you're not it allows the distiller to be much closer to the end consumer. In the past it was you made the stuff, you handed it to sales and marketing or to a
Mm.
distributor, and it went away, and you might get some feedback. But if you have people walking through the door and tasting it, and you are then able to talk to them, that immediate feedback is actually really interesting. And I think in terms of, it's not necessarily going to make you fundamentally change what you make, but you're going to get more consumer insights. And I think at a time when there are so many distilleries and so many whiskies and so much choice, uh, that is also hopefully then going to give you that little bit of advantage over your competitors, your colleagues, but
Mm.
also your competitors. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a vital part of the mix, I would say.
Yeah, I had one of my bartenders go to Isla, and he visited Bruichladdich because he did some event here in Victoria for Whiskey Fest. And he did Bruichladdich, then he walked over to, or drove over to Bowmore, and he walks in, and the young lady at the front desk was like, "Oh, hey, Cade," and he's like, didn't plan anything, didn't know. He's like, "How do you know my name and who are you?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm such and such fiance from Bruichladdich. I work over at Bowmore. We've got you set up. Let's go."
Yeah. I don't you love it? That is so Isla.
Yeah.
People know what you're going to before you've done it on Isla. It's a remarkable island. But I think that's the other thing. It gives the welcoming nature of a distillery tour. People are genuinely excited to show
Mm.
what they are making, uh, and they are proud to show. And I think this is particularly true in Isla. You will have gone from Bruichladdich to Bowmore, but as you said, there's affianced couple, or
Yeah.
the husband might work at one distillery and the wife might work at another, and the daughter might work at another one. So they're proud of the island. They're proud of what that community, that wider community, makes. And you're beginning to see that, around, again, think about what's happening in Australia. If you go to Tasmania, you will be told to go up the road to see this other
Mm.
distillery, because, it's that, what, rising tide and ships and
Hmm.
all of that. Especially at that, I think, especially at this point that we're at, with so many distilleries, because essentially this boom in distillery building is 7 years old, maybe. There were some, a decade ago, but for example, sorry, side issue here. First book, I profiled 150 distilleries. Second book, it was 200. There's 500 in this one. And that's 10 years. So you can really see how
Yeah.
how recent all of this is. And part of that is, when you are going out to the market. So if you're a new distillery like Pokeno or Cardrona from New Zealand, the first ones to go out onto the world market, you're not just selling your own product. You're selling all of New Zealand's whiskey.
Mm.
You're building it. You're helping to build a category. Uh, and within that category, everyone will have their own chance to excel. But so there's that kind of that element, which I think is really important. You're seeing distillers talking to each other a lot more these days.
Mm. So looking forward, what do you see as like, what's your like bright light, silver lining? 10 years. How's whiskey gonna change in the next 10 years?
Uh, okay, this might seem a really weird answer to give, given I've just written the book. I think there's going to be fewer distilleries. Uh,
Mm.
I think there's going to be a shakeout. We're not even we're not paddling in a whiskey loch. We're beginning to wade in a whiskey loch.
Mm.
There's simply a huge amount of oversupply. So I'm afraid to say, I think there will be casualties. So yeah, I see that. What I do also see, however, is greater diversity in terms of flavour.
Mm.
Uh, and I think that is the most positive thing. A lot of these new distilleries are still finding out who they are and how it fits in. I think within 10 years, that flavour profile will have become embedded, uh, and all these fascinating styles that you're beginning to see inklings of at the moment will now become more apparent, and you'll see greater and greater diversity in terms of flavor, and that's hugely exciting. I mean, if you think about what the International Barley Hub is doing, they're based in Scotland, but the name gives it away. They're international in terms of breeding new varieties, but breeding new varieties by the barley genome is like that, and the whiskey industry uses that much in terms of barleys with genetic difference. So there's a huge opportunity in terms of using land races and crossing them to be able to give yield, but also to be able to give flavour. And then also anticipating what climate change is going to do. So having more drought resistance. But the basis of everything that the Barley Hub is doing, and this is going to be open to the industry as a whole, is about flavour. You look at what, and I've whiskey behind me here, Jimmy Red from Highwire Distillery in South Carolina. Astonishing, a corn variety that was almost extinct. It was definitely, just been grown one island, and it was saved by one farmer and then one chef and then one distiller, and now it's being grown everywhere. And it's sold as a bourbon, but it's actually it's 100% corn, and it tastes like there's rye in there, there's malt in there, and everything. It's astounding. And you're seeing all these different corn varieties. Heritage corn varieties beginning to be used. Bloody Butcher would be another good example. What's happening in Mexico is that a lot of farmers seeing mezcal, which I love, but really beginning to understand the sustainability issues around mezcal, but actually understanding that people are getting excited about mezcal because there are differences in terms of flavor of agave. And there you are in Mexico with a huge number of different varieties of corn. So applying mezcal thinking to heritage corns in Mexico. So potentially that's going to be really exciting. So yeah, in answer to that, fewer distilleries but greater diversity of flavor.
It's awesome. So we're at the stage in the interview. I always do this to every single guest. I do 5 deep questions to finish off the interview because it always throws people off, and I love it. What is the one lesson or experience that has shaped your perspective the most, and how do you carry that forward in your life?
The one, sorry, so can you repeat it? He said, thinking.
What is one lesson or experience that has shaped your perspective?
The lesson is always ask why. It's the most important question that any whiskey lover, but certainly any writer, can ask. It gives you a bit of time. If you can't think of a question, then say why. But also, because it is so simple, you will get the answer that you're looking for. And I think the important thing within that then is to take time to listen to the answer. And I think I'm allowed two things, 2 lessons.
Okay.
The other lesson is that this game is not about ego. This game is about, it's like bartending. It's not about you, it's about the drink you're making. The drink is important, the customer is important. Whether you can juggle a bottle or not isn't really important. You are there to make sure that they have a good drink and a good time. And as a writer, what your role is to take the information that you're being given by asking why and passing it on in the best way that you can without getting yourself in the way. So there you go.
If you could leave one lasting message or piece of wisdom for the world, what would it be and why?
Just be nice to each other, love each other. That would be, honestly, that would be it. Look what's just happened in America. Jesus.
Looking back on your journey, what is something you wish you had understood earlier in life?
The importance of not always wanting to be the last person to go to bed.
Oh, that is a good one. That is a fantastic one. I try and live by that rule myself.
I know. It doesn't always work, But...
No. How do you define success, and has your definition changed over time?
Yeah. I think it has. I think I don't even think about success. To be honest, it sounds a bit daft. I don't really think about success. I get a bit embarrassed if people say they like what I've done. I'm flattered, but and I think maybe that's the lesson. That I don't think about success. I think when I was younger, I probably did. I was looking. I looked at reviews. I wanted to know. How the equivalent, how many clicks, and I wanted to be able to say that I'd proved myself. And this isn't an arrogant thing. I think over time, and I've been doing this for like 30 years, that if I'm happy enough with what I've written, then I'm happy. And I don't think about success. It's just I've written it. It's gone out into the world, and I've moved on to to the next thing. But I don't think in terms of success. That's
what do you hope your legacy will be?
I never really thought about that before, Sean.
That was a good one. What do you hope your legacy will be, and what steps are you taking to build it?
None. I don't really think about that. And it's an interesting one. I would like to think that there might be a couple of books that people will look at down the line. But I think it's like a human being. You would rather be remembered as someone who was a decent person, rather than for what you've done.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Dave, that was a absolutely epic chat. I really appreciate your time, man. I know that you've been busy. We sort of jumped this between your Barbados and your Scotland trip, so I appreciate you making time for this.
No, thank you for making the time. Yeah, it's hugely appreciated, and one day I might be allowed back to Victoria.
I would love that. November 26th, the new World Atlas of Whisky comes out, and I'm going to put a link in my bio so people can just go straight there and pre-order it. And just again, man, that was a very spirited chat about whiskey. So I appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, man. Thank you.
Hey, man. Go well. I'll chat to you soon.
Thanks for listening, Pose Shifters. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really enjoy sitting down with friends and peers and just chatting about the industry and getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's really going on out there. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, everything on all the platforms. Just hit it up and I'll do my best to answer any queries or questions you have. I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.